Hi, okay, so welcome back. This is the introduction to VR guide videos, and we're now going to move on to activity 2. Okay, so depending on how the way you want to do it, you may want to do it in activity 1, you might want to do it in activity 2. The first thing I would do to start with is actually kind of getting the players excited about what we're actually going to be doing and show them actually where we're heading towards with this workshop. Because I think it's good to have an understanding of what it's all about. And this is something you could either show on your own, or if you wanted to, you could get the learners to have a go at doing this themselves and loading up the complete game. So obviously what we've got here, we're just going to quickly show them. So we've got a project already set up, and if you're like me, I'm terrible at playing games, but what I just want to do is kind of just run the game to show them the actual final project where we're doing. And that's all this is for, is just to kind of give them an idea. So we're just going to run it, click play, and then we can see everything's moving around. Okay, so, I'm sure you guys will be a lot better than I am, but I'm terrible at playing games. But obviously what I'm just trying to do is get them to actually kind of understand where is this actual final project going to, what are they going to create by the end of this project. So anyway, that's that part done there. So that's a good starting point to sort of like finish up on that side there. So I'm just going to minimize that down. Okay, so at that stage, what we want to do is kind of bring them back into, then let's get them started with the actual introduction part with the start project. Now, the stage is, as I said, it's good to at this point remind them. So this is an intermediate workshop. We've already applied a load of scene assets for you because we don't want to spend too much time on building artistically the elements in the scene. So we've already set some stuff up for you. I would say at this stage, as a group, let's get them to move around. Let's review some elements in there that's actually happening. Okay, so at this stage, what we're going to do is we're going to show them some key features. So, for example, to start with, we can say, as you notice, we've got a platform already set up in the scene for you to get going there. So that's really good. We've already got some UI in there. So, for example, we've got the scoreboard canvas already set up in the scene, so that's really good. That's cool in there. We've got a game manager over in the hierarchy, which has got a script with some referencing already to information to do with updating the UI for the score of everything that's going on there. And we've got some information to do with, say, like, for example, like the player target, so on and so forth. And we've also got a reference to this camera of the within the game as well. You can show them that there is another empty game object in there called object pools, and we've also got the player as well. So what I think is a really good thing to start with on this is also then kind of say, yeah, okay, so we've seen these elements already in the scene, but let's have a look at some key features that's really quite important. So the first thing I would do is start with the UI and say this is going to be working very different to what you may have experienced before. But what we're doing is, because obviously it's VR, we want the experience to be in the world. Very importantly, draw their eyes over to the canvas component for the UI. And usually they may have kind of used screen space overlay, they may have used screen space camera, which is applying it over the top of the camera for the rendering. But what we're using, because we want it actually to be in the actual world where the player is visioning everything, we're this time using world space canvas to make it appear actually here within their physical world space. So that's a good thing to point out in the UI. Explore this with the learners. The game manager, as I said, like I said, we've got a script already applied to it. It's going to be using for spawning enemies. It's going to have an understanding of where the hands are of the player. It's got post effects. It's got the player's target, as I said, the camera, and it's also for updating the score. So point those elements out for them as well. As I said about identifying there's an empty game object called the object pool, you can specify to them that this is it's like a game manager, but it's for actually spawning the enemies into the scene. Explain why this is important for optimization. It's better to have the object spawned or initiated at the very start. And so basically we're just dragging, we're calling up that object from a pool of objects rather than when we want one to actually instantiate it, because obviously that's going to have a big impact on the performance of the game. So it's actually a better thing that we're going to use, and you're going to learn about object pooling. We will add that script later for the learners to explore and understand that. So that's a really nice one to do, and you're kind of linking it to optimization. It's a really good technique overall to be doing. From there, then kind of go on to the player rig. Identify the different features in that. So what I'd get them to do is actually expand it so they can see the other nested objects below. So you can point out that we've got an object for the left hand and the right hand. we've got this HMD, and explain them this is the head-mounted device, but what it actually is the camera for the player as well. So you may get questions like, well, why is the camera, why are we not just like using the camera as the main object, as like the root, the parent object? And obviously explain to them that it's better to have the rig, which has got the collider, and that it's the rig that's moving around, and that the camera can then act as like your head. So we're basically mimicking what it's like in reality. You know, we have a body, we have our head. Our body moves around, but also our head can move around based on the location of where the body is. So we're kind of referencing that way. So that's quite a nice thing to do. So HMD, point out to them that's the camera, but we're referring it to like basically what they are like, what they're set up like in the physical world is a body with a head, and that's obviously attached onto the body. The final thing you can point out is that there's also another element for the player body, and get them to expand that so they can see the other nested object, which is the player target. Now this is where you can now relate this back to activity 1 in discussing, we're talking about performance considerations for VR. So for example, you can specify, we said about kind of, we don't want to cause nausea, we want the player to feel comfortable. So if objects are flying towards the face directly, that's not going to make people feel very comfortable. So what I would do is I'd click on the HMD so we can show them where the origin point, the center point is of the camera. And then, because obviously we want objects to go just a little bit below the camera so it's not directly going into the player's face, if you click on the player target, you can actually see and kind of maybe flip back and forth between HMD, where the center origin point is, player target origin point. The player target, which is what these enemies are and the projectiles are aiming towards, is just below the eye line. So we're relating it back to activity 1. So this is a really good bit. Explore it with the learners, get them used to moving around again, navigating around the Unity space and the editor, and just so they can see all the different features that are in there. Okay, so that's cool. We've covered that bit. Like I said, we don't need to spend too long on that. It's just a bit of exploration, get them comfortable, and get them using it rather than just you showing them. Okay, next part, we're actually going to go on to adding some new environment elements into this. Okay, so let's have a look at that. We're going to, at this stage, you're going to say, right, okay, let's start to build up our scene beyond what we've actually just got in here already. So you can show them, get them to navigate down to the prefabs folder. And what we're actually looking in the prefabs folder is a prefab called ground and buildings. This is what we want to add into it. So what we want to explain to them now as well is this prefab has been saved in a specific location. So what I'd be explaining to them is, rather than left clicking and dragging into the scene, which is then going to provide it with a new location within that world, we want them to drag it actually into the hierarchy window so we can go back to the reference point of where that object was saved as a prefab in its location, so that's optimized for this game. So that's a really good thing to do there. What you might want to explain there as well to them is they may notice is actually that the buildings, they're actually flat meshes as well. So we've got these curved meshes. So rather than being full-on 3D objects with X, Y, and Z properties to them, as in their mesh shape, what we've done is just gone for a flat, curved image, which obviously, you know, this is a really good thing, especially say like for mobile, it's optimized, and it's a lot less information, so we can focus on elsewhere for the performance of the game. So that's a really good thing to do there. Okay, so we've got that. We've now got our buildings in place. Let's move on to the next part we're going to add, which is the skybox. So we can now get them to locate in the project window down to the sky folder. And we've actually got 3 parts in here. Now there's 2 ways you could actually show them how to do this. So the first one, if I just kind of position myself a little bit better, I always kind of get this a little bit wrong here. We've got Skybox, which is a material, as you can see here in my inspector window, and we've got Skybox version 2 or Skybox V2. We've also, though, in between that, we've got a Skybox object. So what I'd be showing them here is one way of applying this is I'm actually going to drag that there. So I could drag the Skybox into the scene window, and that's applied that. If you want to, though, you could show them a second way of doing that is through the lighting window tab. So a way of getting there is going window, lighting, and then the settings tab. That will open up the lightings tab. So you could also show them a second way of doing this is one by left clicking and dragging that material to the Skybox material field up here. As you can see, if I go and get the Skybox, I can go pop that one instead there, or I can go that way. Okay, so you could demonstrate 2 different ways of applying that. Okay, so that's using a Skybox asset, or we could actually just go and apply the Skybox material straight into the lighting settings Skybox material field. That's another good way of doing it. Okay, the final thing we need to add as another prefab into this is we're going to add another object called the VR log. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my prefabs folder, I'm going to go to UI, and you'll see there's a VR log prefab. And once again, we're going to drag this into the hierarchy window so we maintain its original position when saved for the game to turn it into a prefab. So what is the purpose of this VR log? The purpose of this is to be helping us to reduce headset time so we can test and debug this project without having to constantly take our headset on and off. We're building, we're not building, we're running the game. I want to be able to test it actually while I'm not in the headset as well. So this is a specific nice little prefab which we're going to explore more, and you're going to start to see more things building up. That's helping us for testing and debugging the game without having to kind of constantly take the headset on and off, and we'll explore that more in a moment. Okay, so that's adding our new environment elements. That's great. Next stage we're going to be working on is creating the player interaction as well here. All right, so let's get started with this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start to work with our learners on applying some scripts. Okay, and we're going to discuss why we're doing this and what it's actually doing as we're working around this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to now the scripts folder. I'm just going to move this up there a little bit so I can see a little bit more of what's going on. So the first one we're going to work with our players on doing is we're identifying the camera editor control script, and we are going to show the learners how we're going to drag this one onto the player rig. So we're putting that actually onto the main parent object. So if I click on that now on my inspector tab, you can see my camera editor control script, and explain to them actually what this is doing is enabling us for also to be able to debug as well. So we've got the use of mouse control for moving the head, or the HMD, the head mounted device, around. We've got a camera speed, and then we've also got a movement speed for using the arrow keys in the world space. So this is helping us with the debug side of things for movement. So like I said, it's turning the keyboard and the mouse functionality where we don't have to use VR. Brilliant. Okay, that's that one added there. The next one that I would like to talk about with them would be to talk with them about saying, okay, so let's actually have a look at how do we enable VR. All right, so we could explain to them at the very top of the Unity menu, there is a different submenu called VR, which has got the ability to toggle between enable VR and disable VR. This is a custom editor script that's been made that they can use in other projects if they want to, just to make life a bit quicker and easier for enabling and disabling VR while they're testing and debugging. Where is this coming from? You could then direct them down to, in the scripts folder, there's a folder called editor, and it's got a script in there called VR editor toggle. Basically, this is creating the menu item at the top here to be able to do that. What that's actually doing is accessing another area of the Unity menus where we can enable and disable VR. So they can use this in other projects, but you could say to them, okay, well, cool, there's this little script that's been made for you. If you just make a folder in your projects window called editor with this script in it, you can add your own different Unity menus, and you can use this one over and over again. But explain to them, if they don't want to go that way, what they could do is go to they could go to edit, project settings, player, and then what we're looking for is under the XR settings is where that's basically what we're toggling on and off, is virtual reality supported. So you could identify and show that to them as well. So this setting here in the player settings, we're just making it a quick, easier sort of like accessible point to change between those two just by doing that. And it's that easy to adjust and turn that all on. Okay, that's brilliant. Let's now move on to some other parts. So we need to add some other scripts on to get the player interaction. So the next one we're actually looking for is the player tracking adjustment, which we can see just here. And we're going to apply the player tracking adjustment script to, once again, the player rig. So I'm going to drop that onto there. Oh, I don't think it went onto that one. I'm just going to undo that. There we go. So player tracking adjustment. I'm just going to drag that straight onto there. Nope, no, I'll do it over to here then. There we go. Brilliant. Okay, so the player adjustment rig, you can explain to them this is for adjusting the player's height as to whether they're standing or whether they're sitting. So that's what that script's about there. And so obviously that's kind of we're considering the different platform or different VR sorts of considerations. Some we've got world space for moving around in the real world space, or at the same time, if we're going to be having a sit down experience, what will happen is this will adjust the player's height of this player rig to match that. So it's going to change the body height basically for working that. The next one we're looking for script-wise is the body-to-head tracking. So let's have a look for our body-to-head tracking. There we are. That's at the top of that. So this one instead, though, as I said, because the script we've just added is for understanding whether we're sitting or standing or moving around, then what we want it to do is that script's going to then be communicating with the body-to-head tracking to change the height of the player body. So I'm just going to select the player body, and I'm going to drag over the body-to-head tracking. There we are. That's going to now help that. And also what it's going to be doing is helping to rotate the body as well to the direction that the head, the HMD, the camera, is facing. So it's going to be updating elements there. The final script we want to add on is the VR object tracking script. And this one we're going to be adding to our left and right hands because we want to be tracking. So if, say, for example, they're using controllers for their hands, we want to be able to track where are they in the space. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to select the right hand object under the player rig. I'm going to drag the VR object track into there. And I'm going to do the same for the left hand, use the same script. We're going to apply it there. We've also got an adjustment to do now here, which is if I see, you can see here on the left hand where the VR object tracking script is. If I click on the drop-down menu, you can see, well, it's asking, well, what object is this? What VR object am I tracking here? So obviously we've got left hand and we've got right hand. So obviously what we want to do is apply left hand to be left hand, and we want right hand to be right hand. Okay, so at that stage, what's a really nice thing to do is why not get the participants to test it out so they can feel actually they're making progress in this. So if I just make sure I'm facing the right way with my mouse, I kind of keep looking the wrong way. There we go. So we can see now that our mouse is actually moving around. The script for basically for player tracking adjustment in that VR log HUD is showing stationary tracking. So I'm sitting down. We can see that using the arrow keys as well, we're able to start moving around. This is a good point while they're testing it now that gives you time to actually go around the class, make sure everyone is up to speed, if they've got any issues they need any help with. You may find, for example, someone might say, well, these scripts are amazing, but where are they coming from? And someone might want to have that little bit of deeper knowledge of what's happening. There's no harm in, for example, just double-clicking and open up one of the scripts that we've just been applying. So the VR object tracking script, for example, what I'm wanting to identify with them is we're using some already predefined Unity classes in the scripting for accessing VR. And you can explain to them what's really good about this, because Unity, this is going back to Activity 1, can port to multiple different VR platforms by using Unity's built-in VR functionality and components and library. What's really good about this is then it gets translated into those different platforms. So as you can see here, you can point out at the very top here that, like for example, the classes here, we're using the Unity Engine.VR class, which then starts to break it down. You can see that we're looking at the VR settings, we're looking at the VR or the Unity.XR input tracking. So you can relate it back to them to say you can, when you finish this, you can go and access these classes and all this functionality, which obviously makes life a lot easier and a lot better for you developing your own VR. Okay, so that's the end of Activity 2. As you can see, it gives you time to sort of like set things up, go around the class, work with them, encourage them, show them some little bits and bobs, and also you just practicing this idea again of dragging things into the hierarchy window to maintain where its last position was. Okay, we'll leave it there and we'll come back for video 3.